Hey, how are you going? Welcome to Extra Healthy-ish, your podcast from Body+Soul. I am your host, Felicity Harley. To celebrate the year that was, the good bits. Yes, we're celebrating the good bits. We're giving you our top 10 most listened to Extra Healthy-ish episodes. Now, nutrition as a topic, it always goes well on this podcast, but this episode with accredited nutritionist and personal trainer Jacqueline Orwell went off. It was about milk. How do you take your milk? Are you a so-called hipster oat milk devotee, or do you have 4 different types on the fridge? I mean, that's what we do at our house. Perhaps you've ditched dairy altogether, or you're taste testing your way through the 101 alternatives. Well, Jacqueline came on to help you make sense of it all. It's a bit hard sometimes when you're standing in front of that milk fridge in the grocery store, isn't it? Dr Cassandra, thank you so much for coming on Extra Healthy-ish. Now, how do you stay extra healthy-ish in your daily life, especially in lockdown? What do you do?
So, of course, we're all nominated to go for our 1 hour where we get to see the sun. And that's incredibly important for 2 reasons. First of all, it gets us moving. So move is one of the most important things we can do to be healthy. And the second thing actually is vitamin D, which we only get from the sun. You can get it from foods, but you have to eat a lot of those foods to get vitamin D. And, of course, being very sun smart in Australia, which we need to be, because, of course, skin cancer is high rates of skin cancer in Australia. But we don't get even the 10 minutes on our forearm that needs us to get that we need to get enough vitamin D. So I think, going for a walk every day is certainly a brilliant thing to do, and it's one of the things in our study that showed the best outcomes. The other thing I love about your podcast name is healthy-ish, because one of the things we found in our study, there's this perfect health, which is, high-intensity exercises and all these very specific things you have to do. But we actually found, looking over 30 years, it was the women who were healthy-ish that did the best, because being healthy-ish, they could maintain it for the 30 years.
So we're taking a bit of a deep dive into your new book today, which is based on the Women's Healthy Aging Project, which began in 1990. That's a long time ago. For anyone who hasn't listened to the podcast we did on Healthy-ish, can you just tell us a bit about this study?
So the study was actually initially funded just as a 5-year study. And back in 1990, mid-40s women were invited along who were premenopausal, and the study was going to look at their menopausal transition over 5 years. But the first papers that were published from this study was, it doesn't happen in 5 years. So, 20 years later, all of the women had gone through the menopausal transition. And across those decades, we were looking at their life, their home, their health, and what happened to them. And really that forms the basis of this study. We realised there were so many things that impacted health and well-being. And in addition, women now spend, in fact, a third of their lives menopausal. So we are focused on this period of life, and there's so little work available that has data from midlife into ageing. And even internationally, data sets are rare. We're the longest running study in Australia. These women have taught us so much about what we can do from midlife to late life to have the best possible ageing, and they are actually still contributing. So in this next decade, they will reveal to us the secrets for the best over 90s that we can be.
Oh, over 90. Oh. Wow. That's exciting. And can we just take a pause for the fact that you said a third of our life in menopause? For many of us who aren't there right now, that sounds kind of scary. Or should we not be scared?
Okay, so what I mean is in the 1800s, the average age of death was 40. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, the average age of menopause is 50. So in the 1800s, half the women wouldn't have even made it to menopause with an average age of 40 being death. By the 1900s, the average age of death was about 50. So again, people were dying around the same time as they were entering menopause. By the 1950s, the mean age of death was 60. By the 1980s, the average age of death was 70. And by the 1990s, we were getting into the mid-70s. And, just a couple of years ago with the last census for Australian Bureau, I think mean age of death for men was 78, mean age of death for women was 84. So at that point, you're now living a third of your life in menopause. And so I guess what I mean is we don't know about it because no one was looking at it because no one was menopausal. So we have to appreciate 200 years ago, there was no one to ask, hey, what's the menopause like? And so we're very young in this area, and understanding it's really important so we can have optimal aging.
Yeah, actually, that's true. And so we need more studies like you. Thank you for doing this. Thank you. We look forward to talking on the next podcast about that one. Let's talk about your book now. Now, I want to start with brain health. You've got 3 rules for a healthy brain. What should we do? What should women do to help their health of their brain?
Okay, to drop it down to 3 best things to do, I would say number 1 is move. The more you move, the better. Do you know there's researchers in America that have actually shown the more exercise you do, the larger your hippocampi in the brain, which is your memory center. So the more you move, the better for you. The second thing I'd say is eat lots of fresh vegetables and fruit. Lots of micronutrients. You know, the brain is a superpowered organ, runs the whole body. I am a neurologist, so I'm biased, but it's very important to get all those micronutrients. So eat fresh vegetables and fruit, lots of greens. And then the third thing I'd say is connect. You know, one of the weird things that seems to have evolved in medicine is this dichotomy between psychiatry and neurology. You know, mental health and brain health are one and the same. It's the same organ, a lot of similar neurotransmitters, and connecting socially to people around us and getting supports gives us the best possible brain and mental health.
Yeah, good tips and easy to do. But you do write about exercise. You write about exercise being fundamental to healthy aging. And you have this great line in your book. I actually stole this question from your book. If it's so good, why don't we feel like doing it?
Absolutely. So look, we have known about exercising preventing poor health for hundreds of years. That's why everyone's like, oh, I know. However, humans have been around a lot longer than that. Humans have been around for thousands of years. So we were originally designed to be conservative with our movements because food was not so easy to source. So we've got thousands of years of minimising movement and optimising fats and sugars, which were so hard to find in the wild, as it were, that it's very hard when you're in the supermarket aisle and all that's available in that aisle as you walk through is sugars and fats and processed foods. It's very hard to resist thousands of years of evolution when, even though for several hundred years we've known exercise is good, let's face it, to this day in some countries, malnutrition is still causing disease.
Yeah, good answer. So what about, can you just remind us, particularly aimed at women, the main benefits of exercising? And one thing I found interesting about the study is, what did you find that most women do to exercise?
So look, in our study, what we found was physical activity was number 1 for improving your health. And this has been found by other studies too, and we talk about that in the book as well. What was really surprising was we were thinking intense exercise would be the most important. And this is because when we run these very, very intense studies where we hook people up to machines and we make them jog, the more intense the exercise, the greater the blood flow, the more blood vessels get kind of moving into muscles and tissue, the more augmentation we see in brain size, brain volume size, the more intense the exercise, and the more the cholesterol drops, the more intense. So we really thought intense exercise has got to be the right answer. However, in our study, which is novel in its 30 years of duration, we found, in fact, the women who did the best were moving each and every day. And that could just be going for a walk in the park, going for a walk around the block, or taking the dog for a walk. Something as simple as a walk actually put them in that top category. And really it's about doing something for 30 years. So the intense exercises often didn't keep that up every day for 30 years. And what's important is doing it every day for 30 years. So, we saw people who were doing vacuuming, shopping. They would park not as close to the shopping centre because they couldn't anymore because it was too busy and it drove them nuts. And people who were doing that little walk, does it count if I do a half a block walk to get to the shops? It did count. It actually made them healthier.
We will continue the chat after this quick break. What about those people? Were a lot of those people also incorporating more higher intensity exercise, or is that going to have more benefit, I suppose, than just the walk every day?
So in the group, we looked at the activity people did. And really, anyone who was active every day did better than people who weren't active every day. So that's what we saw. And that it was also like a step gradient. So there's this really neat paper we wrote, actually. And in this paper, we actually show for every category of activity you drop by, and that goes from daily, 7 days a week, to 4 to 6 days a week, to 2 to 3 times a week, to once a week, to once a month, to hardly ever, to never. Those are the categories. And every time you dropped a category, you lost a word off your word list. So that's like you're going shopping, you need 12 items shopping. If you dropped a category, there's something you're coming home with that you should have had that you don't.
So you're just not remembering.
2 categories, yes, that's right. They were not remembering as many words on that word test list.
Wow.
So it really has quite significant implications.
Wow, that is fascinating. There must have been times through this study where you just sat there and thought, wow.
Oh, my goodness, there's so many of those times. And I know we're not covering it in this, but one of the key ones, activity was a big one, but it was daily. So, the guidelines say 3 times a week and 150 minutes. And, but I did actually completely change what I was doing to be active every day based on this. And then the second big one was the grandparenting. So we looked at grandparenting and cognition. And we found that people who were looking after their grandkids were doing much better than people who were not. And we found that the more you looked after your grandkids, the better you were doing cognitively, unless you were looking after grandkids 5 days a week or more. And at that point, you actually did worse than the worst category.
Wow.
It went right back down to worse than not looking after your grandkids because people are a bit worried about your cognition, no?
Okay, great. That's one for our parents when they need to look after our kids.
And at the time, of course, I was working full-time at CSIRO, and my mother was looking after my kids 5 days a week. And so overnight, of course, they had to change that situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Oh, that's so fascinating. Now, leaving the grandparents aside, let's come back to nutrition. When it comes to nutrition and women, what should women include in their diet for longevity?
Well, look, I agree. Nutrition can be really hard because it's so complicated. And I've tried really hard to simplify this in a book. So I put down a clear list of what to eat. But, someone said to me, Cassandra, you don't have a recipe in there. There's not one recipe in the book.
That's not a bad thing.
There's a very clear list. There's a very clear list of what you should be eating. And you see, I'm busy and I cheat. So I put 6 vegetables with a touch of turmeric and ginger in a blender with some fruit, and I drink it every day.
Oh,
so
what vegetables? Just quickly, what vegetables?
Oh, the ones in the list in the book.
Oh, the book. Okay,
so,
green
leafies, a lot of kale, love the kale. But any veggies you love with some fruit, touch of turmeric and ginger, and that's what I do. But, it's just a list. And, of course, being a scientist, what do? I chuck all the ingredients in the list in a blender and off I go. But I am really hoping there's some chefs and cooks out there, and I hope they get my list, and I'd love to see them make an actual recipe from the list and share it, because I really would love to try their recommendations on a more nuanced preparation than my scientific cocktail.
There we go. That's your next book, a collab with a chef. Any chefs listening? Here we go. Contact Cassandra. Just lastly, bone health. I mean, that's a big one for women. What were your learnings around this, and what can every woman do now for better bone health in the future?
Yeah, look, bones are incredibly important, and they really do more than just keep us up. They are a powerhouse of immune defence, something we all know more about with the recent infectious disease epidemics. And it's not just our defender cells that are all made in that bone marrow, but also our red blood cells are made there. And these are the cells that carry oxygen to all our cells. So bone health is absolutely crucial. Going back to that vitamin D I was talking about earlier, very hard to eat all the vitamin D you need. The sun seems to be a really important part of that process. But again, 10 minutes a day on the forearm is more than enough to get the vitamin D you need. So no sunbaking in those hours we shouldn't be out. Bone health is really important in women. So women have double the rate of osteoarthritis of men. Women have double the rate of osteoporosis. So really, and these two diseases, I should say, are the most common bone diseases of ageing. And they don't just affect our bone health. they have also been shown to relate to other diseases like heart disease and dementia. And the inflammation that happens with arthritis is thought to be a mechanism here. And of course, fractures and broken bones, these lead to stress of surgeries and other things that then people can get some complication from surgery, or even just simply having surgery can put them into funny heart rhythms and things like this that then have longer term effects on health. So bone health is really key.
So lastly, mental health. I mean, you talk about stress turning into distress. How can we get better at managing this? What do you advise?
So look, again, I summarised a lot of what we know in the field, but also in our project, which went over 30 years, we were expecting that as women got older, we knew they were going to lose relationships. They were going to cope with more exposure to disease and death of people they knew and cared for. So we did expect that they would be more likely to have depression as they got older. But we actually looked at the several hundred women who came each and every year from the 90s through to after 2010. We looked at them all across several decades. And we saw that, in fact, they were less likely to have depression when they were older. And you understand we know everything about them. So we looked and they did have deaths and diseases and lost relationships. So they were getting more stressors, and yet they were less likely to meet the diagnostic criteria for risk of depression. What we found was their resilience was improved. So they had higher positive mood scores, and these were able to offset that negative mood that, of course, is going to go up when you experience bad events. And look, the other thing here is, again, connection. People with social supports, people who are able to have that and reach out for help, which we don't like to do, but they also did better. And look, ultimately, what this study proved over those 30 years was we do get better with age.
Oh, I love that. And we need to end this on an uplifting note, that we do get better, we get more resilient, we get stronger, and perhaps we need to keep those friendships ticking along as well. Dr. Cassandra, thank you so much for joining us on Extra Healthy-ish.
My pleasure, Felicity. It's been fun.
Thank you so very much for listening to this episode of Extra Healthy-ish, the big sister podcast to the one called Just Healthy-ish. Of course, both podcasts are from Body and Soul. If you want more info from us, head to bodyandsoul.com.au. And remember, you can join the conversation via Body and Soul on Instagram or Facebook. Thanks again for tuning in and for joining us this year. And if you have a moment, we'd be so grateful if you could rate, review and subscribe to this podcast. Oh, and wishing you a very extra healthy-ish Christmas.